In the twilight years of the Roman Republic, beneath marble temples and the noise of senatorial debate, a storm brewed that would change the world. It was not the kind of war waged at distant borders or by faceless foes. This war would be fought between Romans, between friends, between giants. At the center of this conflict stood two men who had once shared the same vision, the same table, and for a time, the same power. Julius Caesar and Pompey the Great were not mere rivals. They were avatars of ambition, titans molded by war and sharpened by politics. Their fall from alliance into bitter enmity would tear the Republic apart, unleashing a series of battles that would end an era and usher in something entirely new: empire. But how did two of Rome's most powerful men become its greatest enemies? To understand the war that destroyed the Republic, we must return to a time of uneasy alliances, extraordinary ambition, and the fragile framework of a once proud democracy. At the dawn of the 1st century BCE, the Roman Republic was already a shadow of its former self. Political corruption ran rampant, civil unrest threatened the streets, and the Senate, once the noble heart of Roman governance, had become a tool for the rich and ambitious. It was in this volatile arena that three powerful men forged an alliance that would change the balance of Roman politics forever: the first triumvirate. Julius Caesar, a brilliant politician with massive debts and unmatched charisma, sought military glory to elevate his status. Pompey the Great, Rome's undefeated general, craved recognition and validation from a Senate that feared his power. Crassus, the richest man in Rome, desired military triumph to match his immense wealth. Their union was not built on trust or ideology, but on shared necessity. Together, they bypassed Senate opposition and divided Rome's provinces and influence among themselves. Caesar was given Gaul, Pompey took control of Hispania and influence in Rome, and Crassus was granted command in the east. It was not legal, nor was it moral, but it was effective. The marriage of Pompey to Caesar's daughter, Julia, was a symbol of their newfound bond. Yet even this personal alliance was a political calculation. Though they presented unity to the public, each man kept one eye on the horizon, waiting for the inevitable shift. Before he became Caesar's rival, Pompey had already carved his name into Roman history, known as Magnus, or the Great, a title granted by the dictator Sulla. Pompey was a military prodigy. By his mid-30s, he had defeated Marian forces in Africa, crushed piracy in the Mediterranean in record time, and concluded the long Eastern War by defeating Mithridates VI of Pontus. His triumphs earned him 3 celebrations in Rome more than any living general land. His image was minted on coins while he was still alive. He reorganized provinces, restored order, and returned to Rome, not just as a soldier, but as a symbol of Roman dominance. They delayed land grants for his veterans and refused to ratify his eastern settlements. Feeling betrayed, Pompey turned to Caesar and Crassus. Their triumvirate would serve to bypass the Senate's obstinance, allowing Pompey to secure rewards for his troops and maintain influence over Roman affairs. While Caesar's star was still rising, Pompey's had already reached its zenith. He saw in Caesar a capable junior partner, someone who could be managed. But Caesar had no intention of playing second to anyone. Pompey's popularity with the Senate and nobility, combined with Caesar's growing popularity with the people, created a dangerous balance of power. Over time, what was meant to be cooperation began to feel like competition. And when tragedy struck, that balance would break in devastating fashion. While Pompey basked in the glory of past victories, Julius Caesar was building something far more enduring: an empire of loyalty. His command in Gaul, secured by the triumvirate's agreements, became a proving ground for his military genius. Over nearly a decade, Caesar defeated tribe after tribe, including the ferocious Helvetii, the Belgae, and the legendary chieftain Vercingetorix. The conquest of Gaul not only brought immense wealth to Rome, but made Caesar a hero among the people. He was no longer just a politician in debt. He was a conqueror, and more importantly, his legions adored him. Unlike many generals, Caesar marched with his men, shared their hardships, and rewarded them generously. They would follow him anywhere, even into civil war. But Caesar's success was not just measured in military terms. He was also a master of public relations. His commentaries on the Gallic War were widely read across Rome, written in the third person. They painted Caesar as a brilliant commander, a man of vision, courage, and discipline. They were political manifestos, masquerading as military dispatches. He also sent back enormous amounts of gold and loot to Rome, keeping the urban masses entertained with games and food. The people adored him. The Senate, however, was less amused. His rising star threatened to eclipse them all. They began to plot not to counter him in Gaul, but to strip him of power once his term ended. The triumvirate, always a fragile arrangement, began to disintegrate. Crassus embarked on a disastrous campaign against the Parthian Empire in 53 BCE at the Battle of Carrhae. He was killed and his army decimated. His death not only removed a key player, but destroyed the balance that had kept Caesar and Pompey from open rivalry. Around the same time, tragedy struck Caesar personally. Julia, his beloved daughter and Pompey's wife, died during childbirth. Her death shattered the last human bond holding the two men together. With Crassus gone and Julia dead, nothing remained of the original alliance but ambition and suspicion. Pompey, once Caesar's ally, now drifted toward the Optimates, the conservative senatorial faction. They fed his ego, whispering that Caesar sought kingship, that his legions would soon march on Rome. Pompey began to see himself not as Caesar's partner, but as the Republic's last guardian. He accepted command of all forces in Italy, a veiled preparation for war. Meanwhile, Caesar observed from Gaul. He knew the tide was turning. He offered compromises, requests to extend his command, suggestions for mutual disarmament, but the Senate, under Pompey's growing influence, rejected them. Every refusal, every insult, every threat made war more likely, and both men, in their hearts, knew the moment for diplomacy was nearly gone. As Caesar's term in Gaul neared its end, tensions between him and the Senate reached a fever pitch. The Senate, under the influence of Pompey and the Optimates, demanded that Caesar relinquish his command and return to Rome as a private citizen. This was no mere political maneuver, it was a trap. Without his legions, Caesar would be vulnerable to prosecution, exile, or worse. The law demanded that governors relinquish military control before entering the city. But Caesar's enemies were not acting in good faith. They were maneuvering to destroy him the moment he stepped inside the Pomerium, the sacred boundary of Rome. Caesar appealed to reason, proposing that both he and Pompey disarm simultaneously, but the Senate rejected this outright. Rome itself stood divided. The Senate claimed to defend the Republic, yet they bent the law to their will, sacrificing principle for power. Caesar, though painted as a tyrant, positioned himself as the champion of the people against a corrupt aristocracy. Both sides believed they were saving the Republic, but their solutions were mutually exclusive. The people of Rome watched anxiously as events unfolded. Would Caesar submit to the Senate's ultimatum, or would he choose war? Would Pompey defend republican tradition, or was he now just another warlord in a toga? The fate of Rome hung in the balance, and the answer came with the sound of marching feet at a shallow river in northern Italy. On a cold January evening in 49 BCE, Julius Caesar stood at the banks of the Rubicon River. Behind him were his loyal legionaries of the 13th Legion, men who had followed him through Gaul and trusted him with their lives. Ahead lay Italy and treason. No Roman general was permitted to bring an army across the Rubicon. To do so was to declare war on the Senate itself. Caesar knew that once he crossed, there would be no return. The moment was heavy with fate. According to legend, he paused before crossing and declared, "Alia iacta est, the die is cast." With those words, he led his men across the water, shattering centuries of republican law in a single bold act. It was a point of no return, and Rome would never be the same. The news of Caesar's crossing spread like wildfire. Panic gripped the Senate. Pompey, unprepared for such a swift move, evacuated Rome with his allies and fled south to Brundisium. From there, he would regroup and raise an army in Greece. Caesar, meanwhile, entered Rome unopposed, taking control not through bloodshed, but through sheer momentum. The Republic was now at war with itself. Cities along the way opened their gates to Caesar, swayed by his promises of clemency and reform. The people, weary of senatorial corruption, welcomed him as a liberator. Caesar did not plunder, he governed. But behind every welcome was the looming shadow of civil war, one that would soon ignite the ancient world in flame. As Caesar entered Rome, he found a city not brimming with resistance, but emptied of its leaders. Pompey and the Senate had fled to Brundisium, hoping to regroup and sail to Greece, where loyal legions awaited. Caesar, ever the tactician, refused to allow them the comfort of distance. With astonishing speed, he began a rapid pursuit southward. Caesar's forces moved swiftly, capturing town after town with little resistance. His policy of clemency and his reputation as a fair commander opened gates rather than burned them. Citizens who had once feared his ambition now saw him as a necessary force of change. When Caesar arrived at Brundisium, he found Pompey entrenched but indecisive. The port city buzzed with the clamor of retreat. Pompey, stalling for time, had ordered the construction of ships to evacuate his forces. Caesar attempted to blockade the harbor, hoping to trap Pompey and force a decisive confrontation. But Pompey, master of logistics, slipped through Caesar's naval net and escaped to Greece. It was a bitter moment for Caesar. Victory had been close, tantalizingly so, yet he now faced a harder campaign across the Adriatic. Rome was his, but the war was far from over. In the Senate's absence, he established control over the city and reorganized its functions, placing loyalists in key positions. Still, his thoughts remained fixed on Pompey, the only man who could truly challenge his ascent. By 48 BCE, Caesar had solidified control over Italy and turned his gaze eastward. Pompey had assembled a formidable force in Greece, 11 legions, supported by allies from the eastern provinces and a superior navy that dominated the Adriatic Sea. While Caesar had momentum, Pompey had numbers and strategic positioning. Crossing into Greece was no easy feat. Caesar's fleet was vulnerable, and several attempts were thwarted by storms and Pompey's blockade. But Caesar, relentless as ever, eventually crossed with a fraction of his army. Isolated and low on supplies, he relied on speed and maneuvering to compensate. In the face of adversity, his leadership held firm. For months, the two sides danced in a strategic deadlock. Caesar's troops suffered from hunger and exposure, while Pompey's army, better supplied, remained cautious. Pompey hoped to wear Caesar down, to force him into surrender without a costly battle. Yet Caesar's daring could not be contained forever. In a surprise move, Caesar captured the city of Dyrrhachium, putting pressure on Pompey's logistics. Pompey struck back with a counterattack that nearly destroyed Caesar's army. It was a rare moment of near defeat, and a reminder that victory was not assured. But Caesar adapted quickly. He withdrew, regrouped, and sought a battlefield more to his advantage. That opportunity would come soon near a small town in central Greece. There, on the plains of Pharsalus, Caesar would gamble everything. August 9th, 48 BCE, the sun rose over the plains of Pharsalus, casting long shadows over the assembled legions. Pompey's army, nearly twice the size of Caesar's, stood confident and proud. Among them were senators, nobles, and veterans of Rome's greatest campaigns. Caesar, outnumbered and outmatched, arranged his men with precision. He placed his weakest legions in the center and strengthened his flanks. Most critically, he concealed a fourth line of cavalry and infantry behind his front-end unorthodox formation designed for a single devastating moment. As the battle commenced, Pompey's cavalry, far superior in number, clashed with Caesar's smaller force on the right flank. It seemed a certain rout until Caesar unleashed his hidden line. With short swords drawn, they attacked Pompey's cavalry, not with spears, but with precise thrusts and discipline. Caesar seized the moment. His legions surged forward, driving deep into Pompey's lines. Panic spread among Pompey's ranks, and what began as a battle soon became a massacre. Thousands of Pompey's men surrendered, while many others were cut down in retreat. Pompey fled the battlefield in disguise, his dreams of preserving the Republic in ruins. Caesar had done the unthinkable, defeated a superior army led by Rome's most celebrated general. The Republic, as it had once been, was finished. But even in victory, Caesar knew peace would not come easily. Pompey still lived, and the war was not yet over. Greater tests awaited in the provinces, in Egypt, and even within the hearts of his own allies. For Caesar, Pharsalus was not an end but a beginning. After the crushing defeat at Pharsalus, Pompey sailed to Egypt, hoping for refuge and reinforcements. Egypt was embroiled in its own civil struggle between the boy king Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra VII. Though Egypt had been declared a Roman client state, it was far from stable. When Pompey landed at Pelusium, Egyptian officials to win Caesar's favor, welcomed him with smiles and daggers. As he stepped ashore, a former Roman officer in Egyptian service stabbed him to death before he could speak. When Caesar arrived days later, he was handed Pompey's head in a basket and his signet ring. The sight reportedly moved Caesar to tears. Though rivals, they had once shared political dreams and family ties. Caesar ordered a full Roman funeral for Pompey, with rites and honors, and pursued justice against those responsible for the murder. But Caesar's entry into Egypt was not welcomed by all. Ptolemy's advisors, wary of his growing influence, stalled and delayed Caesar's requests. Cleopatra, exiled and plotting her return to power, saw her opportunity. With legendary cunning, she smuggled herself into Caesar's chambers, hidden inside a rolled-up carpet. Caesar's alliance with Cleopatra drew him into Egypt's civil war. Ptolemy XIII, alarmed by Caesar's favoritism, mobilized his forces. Riots erupted in Alexandria, and the royal palace came under siege. Caesar, with only a small contingent of Roman soldiers, found himself fighting not a campaign of conquest, but one of survival. The fighting was fierce. Roman reinforcements were delayed, and the Alexandrians used their naval advantage to cut Caesar off from the harbor. During the chaos, parts of the famed Library of Alexandria were destroyed, whether by fire or accident remains debated. Cleopatra stood by Caesar's side, not as a passive figure, but as a queen shaping her destiny. With her help, Caesar's forces rallied. When reinforcements finally arrived, Ptolemy's army was routed. In the final battle near the Nile, Ptolemy drowned trying to flee. The victory cemented Caesar's hold in the east. His relationship with Cleopatra deepened. She bore him a son, Caesarion, whom Caesar acknowledged privately but never officially. In Alexandria, Caesar lingered longer than expected, enthralled by the queen and the exotic court. Eventually, Caesar departed Egypt, though not without setting its political future in place. On his way back to Rome, he campaigned briefly in Asia Minor, where he defeated King Pharnicus II of Pontus at the Battle of Zela. The fight was so swift that Caesar wrote to the Senate in 3 iconic words: Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. Back in Rome, Caesar was hailed as a hero and peacemaker. He was appointed dictator for 10 years. With civil wars paused and foreign enemies subdued, Caesar turned to reform. He tackled debts, resettled veterans, launched infrastructure projects, and restructured provincial governance. Most famously, he reformed the calendar, creating the Julian calendar that would shape Western timekeeping for centuries. Yet, beneath the surface, tension brewed. Caesar's accumulation of titles, honors, and powers unsettled many senators. Statues were erected in his likeness, temples were proposed, and murmurs of monarchy began to spread. The Republic, fragile as ever, struggled to reconcile its traditions with the reality of one man ruling above all others. The final act began on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. Caesar, despite numerous omens and warnings, attended a Senate meeting in the theater of Pompey. It was there that a group of conspirators, led by Brutus, Cassius, and other senators, They stabbed Caesar 23 times, killing him at the base of a statue of Pompey. Rome descended into chaos. The assassins claimed to have saved the Republic, but they had misjudged the people. Caesar's death did not restore liberty. It unleashed another round of civil wars. The Republic gasped its last breath as Caesar's adopted heir, Octavian, rose to challenge the conspirators and eventually claimed the title of Augustus, Rome's first emperor. The war between Caesar and Pompey marked the end of Rome's Republican age. It was not a single battle or event, but a cascading series of choices, betrayals, and ambitions that unraveled centuries of tradition. Pompey died, seeking safety in a foreign land. Caesar died, surrounded by betrayal in the heart of Rome. Their civil war did not simply settle a rivalry. It shattered a world. From its ruins rose the Roman Empire, grand, powerful, and autocratic. Caesar and Pompey remain symbols, one of conservative resistance, the other of revolutionary ambition. Their clash echoes through time, a warning of what happens when power eclipses principle and personal rivalry consumes the state. In the end, the Republic did not fall because one man crossed the Rubicon. It fell because too many believed they alone could save it.